I am now really looking forward to introducing and facilitating the next panel. The title is Why Women Are Burnt Out. We only have 30 minutes assigned for this. I think we could probably talk for 3 days on this subject because we know that the pandemic has left women exhausted, burnt out, and reconsidering their pathways. So what comes next? I will now be joined by heart-centered medical entrepreneur and consultant in pain medicine, Dr. Olivia Ong, and psychologist and co-founder of Connect Psych Services, Dr. Natalie Flatt.
Hi, Georgie. How are you?
Good morning, Georgie. Morning, Natalie.
Good morning to you both. So I'm going to ask you, I'm going to kick off with one question the same question to both of you. Why has the pandemic impacted women's health more profoundly than men?
Would you like me to start?
Yeah. Yes.
Sorry,
Natalie,
you go first.
That's okay. Look, I think, Georgie, it's in several areas, isn't it? It's around the workplace, especially in the health sector and the social sector. We look at around 70% of the health workforce is made up of women globally. They're often the frontline workers, they're the nurses, they're the midwives, they're the community health workers, and even the health facility staff, the cleaners, the laundry, the catering is more so made up of women there. You then added that on with that increased workload due to lockdown, homeschooling, quarantine measures. It's absolutely exhausting. I'm a mum myself, and burnout has been a hot topic, within my personal community, but also, within the workplace. And that's probably one huge concern. But another huge concern that we're starting to see a lot of is the increase in domestic violence cases, and which, that we do see that consequence occur after epidemics, have occurred around the globe. And these women, unfortunately, have found that they don't have the avenues to escape from due to the lockdowns and the restrictions. On the other hand, I work with another charity at the moment where we're seeing self-harm and suicide ideation, and also suicide completion really starting to kick up, particularly in young women. So what's going on there? So it's certainly something that has been simmering, as you said, in your beautiful talk before, Georgie, pre-COVID, but this has just exacerbated it to really bring to the forefront that we need to really be looking at how we're going to be able to deal with burnout, and the gender inequality about that.
I guess from
Olivia.
I guess from the healthcare perspective, women, especially female healthcare workers, have got especially the working moms, have got the added responsibility of the external environment where they work in. They have to be in the protective personal gear all day. It's pretty uncomfortable, and they don't. It's really hard to go to the bathroom or even eat in that. So you can imagine the conditions they're working under. It's not pleasant, and not only that, they have got also this responsibility of also homeschooling their kids. Especially, I'm from Melbourne as well. I had to homeschool my 6-year-old as well, in addition to working from home. I think that's not just medical moms, probably moms, working moms in general. We had to do that. We had to juggle our workload and the homeschooling. And kudos to teachers for what they do. It's not easy over the last 18 months. But I think what is quite unique to female healthcare workers is that constant fear of possibility of bringing COVID back home. So a lot of female healthcare workers do end up staying away from their family and being isolated for a couple of months, which is not great. So that puts a lot of responsibility on the partner or other family members to look after their children. So that's probably a unique perspective from female healthcare workers.
Yeah, I can say my husband works in the public health system. And when COVID first hit, so well before vaccines were an option, I found that really stressful. And he would come home from work, and I was terrified that he was bringing it home. Not that he was working in, he wasn't in a COVID ward, and it wasn't. But that just is, and I know from a lot of the healthcare workers I know that that's a really genuine additional pressure. And I think, I mean, in terms of the burnout factor, the Women's Agenda did an ambition report earlier this year, and 39% of women reported concerns that they were either experiencing burnout or would experience burnout because of COVID. 39% of women, that's a significant chunk. What do the implications of this mean, do you think, longer term, if we have got a significant chunk of the female population experiencing burnout? What does that mean, Olivia?
Okay. So this probably ties into the actual definition of burnout. So burnout has three components. First of all, it's physical and emotional depletion. We just feel constantly exhausted all the time. So that's one thing. And the second thing is there's this sense of, we call it depersonalization. We start to disconnect with ourselves and the people around us. So we get snappy, cranky, irritable at, first of all, obviously our kids and our husbands or partners, and then followed by colleagues, then patients, sadly. And thirdly, which is the sad thing, because a lot of us women are very mission driven, right? And the last thing that really gets to people will be what's the use, that their loss of purpose in the work they do. And collectively, these three components of burnout is really what I guess affects people from an emotional and mental health issues perspective. Not only they start to have problems with anxiety, depression, self-medicating. Self-medicating is not just just taking medications. It's also drinking lots of alcohol, which we have seen in the pandemic, and sadly taking pain medication. I'm a pain physician, that's my work. And sadly, some healthcare workers have had to do that to deal with the emotional stress and trauma they had to witness and endure during the pandemic due to their workload. And I think one of the saddest things that we're seeing in healthcare professionals will be suicides. And I have to admit that burnout was an issue way before COVID. If 39% of women are burnt out, stats have shown that healthcare workers, about 43% were burnt out before COVID, and female doctors and nurses, they've done studies across the board, like nurses, doctors, paramedics. The female healthcare workers are definitely more burnt out, which fits in with the study that Women's Agenda has done as well. It'll be correlated. But sadly, after COVID, that figure of 43% have jumped to 64%. So it's almost double. So think of it, when you go to hospital, the doctors and nurses who are treating you or the paramedics who brought you to hospital, 64% of them are burnt out. So yeah, it's clearly a health issue, a crisis that we have to address and make the public be aware of it.
Natalie, what are your reflections on the longer term implications from this burnout epidemic?
I think that one of the concerns as well is that people don't actually know how to recover, because you're looking at that differentiation between, acute stress, chronic stress, and then burnout. And the difference between that chronic stress is that ability that we're probably all as working women and working mums, that we've always think that we can get on top of that if we just get this done, if we just get this done, we just get this done. So we've been living in this chronic state of stress where the adrenals have just been pumping for so long. And then when our cup is literally filled and just overflows, and then we get that level of cynicism and that disengagement, and that, how do we cope through, a lot of that time, that substance abuse or that complete physical exhaustion before, 8 a.m. comes along, we're already absolutely done. I'm sure you know that feeling anyway, Olivia, isn't it?
Totally.
That you don't have anything left in the cup for anyone else, and certainly then not yourself. So I think that there's that it leaves people with that, again, how do I recover from that? And so I feel that some of that percentages also is the fear, is because burnout is really it creeps up on you. You don't actually know that it's coming. But you can see all the signs on the way, but because we think, if we just get this done, if we just get this done, if we just get this done. And because we've been in this chronic state of stress for 2 years now, people just don't feel that they have anything left. The ramifications of women not going back into the workforce is enormous, and it's, but from a female perspective, The concern is the recovery. And, we know that, when you don't have that level of employment or have pulled away from that employment, what that actually does on your mental health, how that affects your identity. So again, the substance abuse can be exacerbated. The anxiety, the depression can really increase. So we're going to see that huge rise when we see the rise in burnout, we're going to also then see that consequence of mental health statistics for women rising even higher.
Yeah, I mean, and I think one of the really, I mean, you don't need research to know this, but research has certainly shown that, particularly for working parents of primary school age children, the levels of mental distress experienced have been really alarming. And I think, again, and someone here has made the comment that for lots of working women, even before COVID, they were feeling exhausted. I mean, I can certainly relate to this year, before the sort of shutdown that we had from June. Before that, I wasn't dealing with COVID, but I was absolutely exhausted trying to do the things that we have to do when you are working and you've got small kids, and it is a constant juggling act. But then when the shutdown happened, it really is. And I mean, in our house, we had 2 primary schoolers, and our youngest daughter is at preschool, and she actually did stay going because my husband is in the health workforce. He wasn't at home.
Yeah.
But it just felt like a sick joke, because I was waking up, and I mean, look, even the kids, and I know for lots of families this has happened, like our kids have been great sleepers for a long time, but we certainly had disrupted sleep, not every night, but lots of the time, and I know lots of families had that. And then, there was no end in sight. There was no, really hard to delineate between work and family and home. And, I was attempting to be a teacher, a psychologist, a friend, a parent, a worker myself, a cook, a cleaner, all within this same window. And I think that's in a house where I was lucky that we weren't also dealing with lost employment or, financial stress because our business was going under. We still had work. But I just think the cumulative toll on people is it's extraordinary. And I guess I'm interested to know from both of you, and I mean, you alluded to this, Natalie, that it is hard to know when you it's hard to know just before you get to burnout. I think we could say, I think most people I know are at a low level of burnout. Genuine. And I think they would say that really genuinely. I know lots of people, I have found that concentrating is much harder than it was. And I think that's because I spent 4 months where I was just constantly moving between, putting out fires, work-wise, home-wise, kids-wise, teaching-wise. So what can we do about it? If we feel like we might be very close to burnt out, what are the things that we can do to non-burnout?
Yeah.
To refuel.
Refuel, and that's it. And look, burnout, theoretically, it's actually quite a long recovery because we've been in a chronic state of stress. Our adrenals don't know how to react in the way that it did. And so, from a biological and physiological perspective, it does take a little bit of time to recover and can take, Dr. Ong, like 1 to 2 years, like we can say that it can take from a biological perspective. Because we've got all these neurological pathways due to our adrenal responses have been created and formed. Not only that, Georgie, you said it beautifully before, just that social pressure. Well, I'm not in the position of others, like we've still got our job. So you're dismissing your stress because, you think, well, I don't have it as bad as others, so I've got nothing to whinge about. And so that's actually pushing that emotion aside without actually acknowledging the emotion. So we do a lot of work around that. And then you had that language state, that when is the end in sight? Like I just feel like I'm midair all the time and I'm just going to keep going, but I don't know. I can't see the finishing line. And I think I get around that corner and then, no, it's not there again, and keep going. And we really hit languishing, especially in Victoria, quite hard a few months ago. And so that's probably where we really want to start, is that bring the element of self-care back in. Women are notorious for being, I used to call it well-being by proxy. And I used to love it to go that I'm a mum of 2 primary schools as well, and then trying to keep everyone else's mental health above board. And I'd always say to my children came first. I want them to have their, I create these structures, and again, you'd have these fun days, and my husband would think I'd, loony, I'm sitting there gluing all the photocopying everything, gluing that right, everything's right, okay. And I just felt like that was my element of control, but I wasn't actually saying to myself, hey, maybe I just need to go and take a bath, or maybe I just need to go and, label my own emotions right now, that I'm feeling very overwhelmed. I'm feeling very sad. I'm feeling very resentful and angry. Any of that, those whole spectrums, and being able just to take it down. I'm not a robot. And I think women would need to be those robots. We'll just do everything, and we'll be able to compartmentalize it because we're the problem solvers of the world. And so just to stop and say, what matters to me right now. And I do a lot of work, firstly around creating those protective factors, purpose alignment. Okay, why are you doing this? Find your why again. Simon Sinek, he does it very well in that area. Let's go and find our why, because a lot of women that we're talking to, they're stopping and they're like, I don't know who I am anymore. I feel like I've lost my complete identity. I'm in survival mode. I want to get out of it, and I don't actually know where. So yes, we have to take that physiological perspective, but we have to also label how we're feeling, because once we can label how we're feeling, that's starting to bring that whole prefrontal cortex back in process. That also gives a signal just to alleviate the adrenals. Alleviate those adrenals. And then be able to get some clear thinking in. As you said before, I'm just losing concentration so easily. I could be mid-sentence a few months ago and then go, what was I talking about? Like, I completely lost track. It's because the adrenaline affects our decision-making, our organisation. Like everything, we're in that fight or flight mode all the time. So we need to kind of bring that back. Active recovery. Going out, we do a lot of work around forest bathing. That's the new thing in the US, going out, taking in the elements, looking at all the fractals in the air, that's through clouds, snowflakes, leaves, bringing those that alpha brain or alpha wave activity again to that relaxation. We have to train ourselves back into it, but it's a conscious effort. And sleep. I think Dr. Nikki spoke a lot about that, but the quality of sleep and sleep hygiene. We all got very much used to this technology, didn't we? Technology really ruled our lives. Get it out. Let's reset. What's really good, what's really helpful for us right now. But as women, we have to actually make that conscious effort to do it. Wellness is a resource, but it's also a discipline. We can take this back, and that will then aid that recovery, but also there are higher elements at play that also need to be taking part in this, because individual burnout and looking at the protective factors for individual burnout will only get us so far as women when we enter back into the workplace.
Dr. Ong, what are your sort of tips on recovering from burnout?
Yeah, certainly. I think one of the things I want to talk about is about mindset pitfalls. A very common reason why female doctors burn out a lot more than male doctors in general is because of two things. It's that there's imposter syndrome, because we are afraid of being proven that we are frauds. I mean, this is a thing that constantly plagues female doctors. And on top of that, that tendencies to be like, I want to be a superwoman. Like I want to be the best in everything. And these two, when in combination, is the recipe for burnout. And this is one of the common reasons why female doctors burn out. And I'm a coach myself, so I coach female doctors through burnout. This is a very common thing they tell me about as well. And so one thing, mindset pitfalls. The other thing will be, as doctors and healthcare professionals, I'm talking about nurses and paramedics, we're all programmed to be lone rangers. We don't want to ask for help. Maybe this is similar across all working women, really. Because when we ask for help, it means that we're weak, we're not strong, we're incapable, all that kind of, ruminating thoughts. And that's also a recipe for burnout. So just being aware that we have that mindset and we can change it, that's one thing. And I think we have to see burnout not as a problem that we can just fix and then it just gets done and dusted. It's going to be a constant dilemma. We're going to be experiencing like near burnout episodes or kind of in it. So we have to kind of recognize the warning signs in ourselves. We all have a barometer of our own burnout. So for me, it would be poor sleeping pattern and getting cranky at my kids. That would be one thing. And then for someone else, it would be a different barometer. So I think self-awareness is really key. So that's that one. Self-awareness of mindset, pitfalls, and self-aware of your own burnout threshold, I guess. And then the last thing is to adopt, I think Natalie have highlighted a few habits as well, good habits. We all should have 2 or 3 habits as a strategy plan for burnout prevention. So like definitely good sleep, self-care. For me, mindfulness and self-compassion practices are very helpful, especially during that 262 days of lockdown in Melbourne we had. That was very helpful. And just exercising, that was my habit as well, just trying to get out there and do something else other than being stuck at home. So those are like adopting 2 or 3 healthy habits to prevent burnout.
Yeah, amazing. One of my favorite quotes on self-care is from an American author, Brianna West, and she said, self-care is not bubble baths and chocolate cake. It is creating a life from which you don't need to escape. And I have been fond of that quote for a very long time, but I thought about it a lot during lockdown because we actually were in circumstances that we couldn't escape, and we actually, so I think that's the other thing, and this is definitely coming out in the comments, that we do have to really step back and recognize that we're not burning out because we lack resilience. We are burning out because what we have been enduring is impossible. It is so difficult to do. And as you've both made the points, and I mean, I made this in my earlier keynote, that women have been struggling mentally and physically in terms of their health for a really long time for lots of the same reasons, but COVID just exacerbated it in ways that honestly you could not actually probably script a more devastating set of conditions. So we've got a few minutes left, and I'm interested to know from you, we have definitely talked about some of the things that individuals can do, and I think those it is true that the habits that you create, being really disciplined about those habits as well, which I think that can be hard to do, but it does make a difference. I know for me, walking in lockdown was my savior, as it was, and I guess that was sort of where I would attempt the kind of self-compassion and look outside, be outside, that sort of thing. But I'm interested in your thoughts on what employers and leaders and governments can potentially do to support women through this sort of mental health crisis. Natalie, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. This is the moment, isn't it, for governments and, to recognise the enormity of the contribution of women, and the precarity of, I suppose, of so many. We really want to obviously start with looking at how the World Health Organization in 2019 has added burnout to the ICD, or the International Classification of Disorders. And, it took people from, they're just burnt out, to, wait a sec, where does burnout actually originate from? And it's actually an occupational phenomenon. Like we're hearing a lot of words around parental burnout, but burnout within its, it's really founded in the workplace there. So the 6 root causes of this, Jennifer Moss in America, she really summarised this really well, is that unsustainable workload that we did feel, the perceived lack of control, the inefficient acknowledgement of what we're doing, and the lack of support that we do receive, a lack of fairness, whether that's from a financial fairness, even the roles. We look at the dismal percentage of C-suites in the world who are women compared to men, and that mismatched values and skills. So these are kind of those areas that we could hone in on, and we could work together, or organisations can work together as one to be able to break down and to create that level of psychological safety. What is going to work for women, and our team as a whole as we enter 2022, and having that table of different people, like a UN, dare I say, like at each organisation, where we have decision makers who are mums of different aged children who have different skill sets and occupations, and then say, what's going to be fair here? What's going to work? And let's work together and be transparent about this. It's one way to bring your piece to the table. We've been working with a lot of companies, and even in their daily stand-ups, we said, okay, it's really good to even name an adjective about how you're feeling today. And so they don't have to explain anymore. But during lockdown, that was really, helpful for people to be able to gauge. As you said, you had some sleepless nights, Georgie. I'm sure that there would have been some different emotions in the morning, and sometimes, oh, look, a little dot there. And, to be able then to say, okay, Katie here, she's actually stated that she's really irritated today. I think that, something has gone on for Katie, last night or, from yesterday. I'm not going to take that personally, right? And if Katie's a bit snappy in the meeting, dare I say, I'm not going to turn around and say, well, what's wrong with you? Okay, I know that Katie might have 3 kids at home. She's homeschooling. So it basically just that one adjective, what it does is it creates this level of empathy. And that's where, you need that empathetic communication to then create that psychological safety. Small things like that have to be acknowledged to not only break down the stigma, but just to make it fair, so people are not going to be the superheroes anymore, because we can't have that, because that is being the superheroes and taking on too much of a load is going to directly lead down to burnout.
Olivia?
I guess I want to speak on probably in the perspective in healthcare in general, because pandemic fatigue burnout is very real in the healthcare workers, even though we are free to do whatever we want now because we're out of restrictions and out of lockdown. But it's not over for the healthcare workers in general. They've had to still, on top of their current workload, there's extra workload to look after patients with COVID. So I think one of the things in the short term, we need to be lobbying to the government to actually channel more resources to the underfunded, under-resourced hospitals to boost staff, so existing workforce is not as overstretched. And resources definitely need to be funneled towards increased mental health support and also raising awareness of mental health and burnout in the healthcare workers to the broader community. And I think one of the unique challenges, I think Dr. Nikki Stem actually brought up about vaccination and things. There's been a lot of the nurses and doctors have been copying a lot of verbal abuse from the public because of the polarity of the vaccination issue. And it's been unpleasant. The kind of verbal abuse, they shouldn't have to endure things like that. So I feel that implementing a behavioral contract with the general public, so that when they come into contact with the frontline staff, they can treat them with respect and kindness. Definitely. And I think from a medium-term perspective, what I'm really interested to pursue with quite a number of hospitals and organizations I'm working with will be to implement peer-to-peer coaching programs in hospitals and healthcare organizations. I think that will be very helpful for frontline healthcare workers who are not very willing to ask for help. But I think with coaching, they will be a bit more receptive. And I think the healthcare industry overall just needs to have a big change, like about safe working hours for doctors and nurses in general to protect their well-being. And also destigmatizing mental health and being okay to ask for help. I mean, tennis and AFL has done they've done some successful campaigns to highlight issues of it's okay to come out with, that I have depression, I have anxiety or things like that. It should be okay for healthcare professionals to ask for help. The thing is, they don't. They're scared to, they're scared to ask for help because they fear of feeling weak or being perceived as weak. And I think in the long term, hospitals should incorporate well-being programs of a more immersive nature rather than just ticking off the checklist, really. I think just making the working environment healthier and making sure that the healthcare professionals are being looked after. That's all there is to it, really. And And I think even next year, they'll still be recovering from the repercussions of what's happened over the last 2 years. And so we've seen that in the US and European counterparts who are struggling with it right now. And 30% of them will probably leave the profession altogether. You know, we talked about the hashtag Great Resignation, right? It's already happened in healthcare.
Yeah.
In America and UK, 30% of doctors and nurses have left. So, most likely it'll happen to us as well. So we have to be mindful of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because we are, I mean, in the talk that I gave at the beginning, I was talking about how if we want to be serious about gender equity, we have to pursue structural solutions. And I think we really need to be looking at structural solutions for these, for all of these problems. And I mean, they are interconnected. Olivia, as I have mentioned, my husband works in the public health system. He is a doctor, still finishing his training. And I have watched in astonishment for a long time at the conditions that doctors and nurses and allied health in hospitals are expected to work in. And I just, it is really heartbreaking to consider the load that particularly the doctors and nurses in COVID wards are carrying. And I think I would like to thank you and all of your colleagues for the work that you've done. And that's the same with you, Natalie, as well. I think we have never needed psychological support. We've never needed medical support the way we have. But as you've both acknowledged, you were both providing that healthcare, but also managing the other stuff on the home front that we're all dealing with. And I guess I have seen it come up in a lot of the comments that we really do need to move away from this being the individual responsibility in terms of, you know, individual doctors are not suffering from burnout because they're not resilient. You know, they're being stretched, and what's being asked of them is, I'm interested to know from both of you, do you get the sense from the people that you work with that they have internalized this as something that they're doing wrong, if they're having a tough time, or do you think they're recognizing that it's a systemic issue and that what they have been asked to absorb is sort of impossible?
Probably we work with across a lot of industries, so I'll leave the healthcare industry for you, Olivia, even though we do work in it and I'm in it. But we see that in burnout, people believe that burnout is individual, you know, across the board. They don't believe that, you know, with the organisation, there obviously has been that element where there's been those huge workplace relationship breakdowns due to communication, due to, again, what we're classed as that adrenal response. So it's very angry, it's very irritated, it's probably more flying off the cuff than normal. And then people are coming back saying, what's going on with you? Or, you know what, I just can't handle it right now. I'm not taking on my load right now. Like they did internalize that a lot. But then at the same time, a lot of people were externalizing it, but the blame was just getting pointed everywhere. So you can just see this whole workplace relationship breakdown that was occurring. And we were seeing that. We've got a health tech platform, so we were seeing the onboarding and the reasons people are onboarding. It was very similar to that area of just I can't cope anymore. But they didn't really go to, well, if something happens at work, I can't cope, but I'm not sharing that with anyone. I'm going to tell you confidentially. And so we're obviously then encouraging what you said before, Olivia, that the buddy system policy is fabulous, you know, and having that element of trying to disconnect, because burnout is very much pulling away socially. Having someone at work or even someone outside that you can then talk to and dare I say, you know, be accountable with, even from a self-care perspective is really important, that you've got that avenue of support, which we tried to create within a lot of people. But one of the main issues that we did see was that factor of isolation. So, we saw that consequence of isolation was due to that internalization at the start. So, workplaces, I suppose, have got to take this on as that this is a huge systematic change that does need to happen. It won't, obviously it's not going to happen overnight, but smart companies are going to work towards that, because it's going to be looking at from a financial perspective as well. They want to retain the workforce they have. It's going to be costly if they don't on a number of factors.
And I think, burnout is one of those experiences where it's actually the lack of compassion towards yourself. And the way I see self-compassion is it's the likely antidote or the potential antidote to burnout, really. Because when you're burnt out, you're not even mindfully aware that you're suffering. You just feel that, and then, like I think Natalie pointed out, isolating. You just feel like you're on your own, suffering by yourself. And then when you're going through that chronic stress and burnout, that's all the adrenaline that Natalie talked about, adrenaline, cortisol. It's like your threat system has been activated nonstop, essentially, for a long time. And that will manifest itself in self-criticism as well. Like, I must be a crap doctor, because I mean my colleagues are dealing with burnout pretty well. Like, but that's obviously outwardly. But why do I suck at it? I'm so bad at it. So it becomes that self-criticism activates the threat system again, and eventually it leads to that spiraling down of, what's the use of me being a doctor anyway? That's that lost sense of purpose, and then just being so unkind to yourself. That's why self-compassion Kristen Neff has done beautiful research on this. She's been an expert in this area for like more than 10 years, but she talks about how self-compassion it can help burnout, because it forces you to not force you, it enables you to acknowledge the fact that you're suffering from burnout. I think that self-awareness is the first point, right? Like, you have to know that you're suffering from it, or even acknowledge it in the first place. And secondly, to just be aware that you're not alone. Like, everyone else is suffering through this experience, burnout in different ways. It could be parental burnout, healthcare burnout, pandemic burnout, small business owner burning out because they're just lacking finances, and they have to worry about their families, how to feed their families and all that, pay the bills. Lots of different ways of burning out. And I think the most important piece is that kindness and forgiveness towards yourself, and accepting that it's okay that we're imperfect. We don't have to be superwoman or superman or whatever. We just accept ourselves just as we are. And and self-compassion is it's definitely the antidote to burnout, for sure. Has helped me. I'm sure it's helped a lot of people as well.
Yeah. And that element of self-compassion as well. Sorry, Georgie, just at the, like I always say to clients, like, would you say that to your best friend?
Yes.
No, absolutely not. I said, so why are you saying it to you? And that's a really good question to keep in your own mind. Like, when you're just starting to doubt yourself, or when you're feeling very low, and you can become aware. It's like, would I speak to my best friend like that? What would I say to get her or him out of it? And also that, we say it all starts with one conversation. So once you then state, that I'm feeling this way, more often than not, the others are going to say, other people are going to reciprocate that.
Exactly.
And so it creates that validation and that normalization, which then opens up for that problem-solving strategies. And then if you can strategize together as a team, you're more likely to protect yourself from burnout.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I think that is a really fabulous note to end this conversation on. I think that it is true. I can't remember what the exact quote is, but kindness is a radical act. And I think that kindness towards yourself is probably the most radical of all, because I think it does go against the grain. But it is a game changer. I know for myself that when I was sort of at my lowest ebbs, and I had several very low ebbs in lockdown when it just all felt too much, and I felt so overwhelmed. And, I think the experience of just feeling like you're doing everything badly, and that was something that I know a lot of people felt. I wasn't able to work as well as normal. I couldn't parent as well as I normally could. Nothing was as good as normal. But really being kind to myself and recognizing these are not normal situations, that everything you're doing is enough. But, it's hard, but it does make a difference. Thank you both so much for your time today and for sharing your wisdom. And thank you to the Women's Agenda team for letting me facilitate this fantastic conversation. So thank you both.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having me.